Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to session 4, and in fact, session 5. I'm going to incorporate the two today on the certificate in management and leadership program that we're running. Now, I'd like to start with a very brief review. In the first session, we looked at the difference between managers and leaders. People call themselves leaders in the church, but in terms of my understanding, a lot of it is not leadership. They're administrators. And we looked at the difference between being a manager and being a leader. And management is undoubtedly something that can be learnt. It's a skill. It's a process. Leadership is more difficult to define. It is inextricably linked to our personalities and certain key behaviours. We're going to be going into that a little bit later in the programme when we get on to some of the more complex aspects of management and leadership. In the second session, we looked at the business planning process, and I talked about the MOST model of business planning that is generally accepted around the world as the model to use. It starts with mission, then it has objectives, then it has strategies, then it has tactics. And it's the tactics, of course, that managers are primarily involved with. It's leaders that tend to determine the vision and the strategies. But somebody has to turn that into the practical reality and delivery of those. And that's where management comes in. Last week, I talked about this somewhat nebulous, difficult to understand concept of culture, but how important it is to understand the culture that we come from, and that others may come from different cultures. And there are differences. We need to know what those differences are. And if we are to communicate, which is a key skill of management and leadership, if we are to communicate effectively, we must be in touch with an understanding of cultural diversity. It's no good me trying to talk to somebody from Japan the same way as I would talk to somebody from the USA. I have to change my style. They don't have to change their style. If I'm doing the communicating, I have to change. So we looked at cultural diversity and the importance of it in terms of the effectiveness in our roles. So this week, as I say, we're going to try and cover two things. We're going to look at 4 key skills of managers. And I'm also going to try and fit in an issue to do with target priority setting. I nearly said target setting there, but in some respects they are linked. Let's start off with the 4 key skills. And let's remember that as I talk through these 4, I'm talking about the management of people, but I'm also talking about the management of processes and the management of resources. In fact, later on in the program, I'll give you the full list of what this process involves. But let's start off with giving you the 4 key, absolute critical steps of good management. And the first one is planning. Planning. You see, I, as a leader of Christian Warriors for God, was given for the Lord Jesus Christ an anointing and a vision. But that alone is not going to achieve anything. Yes, I had to set some objectives. I was following the business model and some strategies. But at the tactical end, it's the planning that becomes important, because that's what's going to make it happen. Now, when we think about planning, there is a lot of decisions involved in planning. And frequently, in making those decisions, we have to look at the quality of the data that we're using to make those decisions. We'll be talking more about that in problem solving, because the quality of your problem solving is directly related to the quality of your data that you're using. So in planning, data is important. But in planning something, we have what is known as a critical path. If you like, key steps to get us from here to here. Now, let me give you a simple example. I've been invited to a conference of Pentecostal bishops later this week. Now, it seems fairly straightforward. Well, all I've got to do is buy my ticket for the train and turn up. But it's kind of slightly more complicated than that. Because if you think about the beginning, where I am now, to where I want to be later on in the week, I've got to do certain things. There are certain key steps along the way. Firstly, having checked my diary and seen that I was available, I've got to start thinking about how am I going to get there. So, key step might be to find out the trains, the times, connections, etc. Secondly, I've got to think about, can I get there and get back in a day? Because if I can't, then I've got to think about accommodation. And that's got to be planned. Thirdly, I need to think about, because I've been asked to speak, what it is I'm going to say. Have I got something to say? If not, why am I going to this conference? Fourthly, I need to recognize that whilst I'm there, I've got a tremendous opportunity to network. So I better make sure I've got plenty of these with me, my business cards, because I want to network with people. That's part of my rationale for going. And fifthly, there are issues of planning what I wear. Should I wear my full bishop's uniform, for want of a better word? That's what I often call it. Or should I wear something much more casual, as I would if I was normally preaching in a Pentecostal church? So you see, there are steps, so what we call a critical path. So you have to say, this is where I am, this is where I want to be, these are the things that have to be done. Now, part of the planning process is always to think about contingencies. Contingencies are about asking the question, what if this goes wrong? What do I do? Now, contingency planning is something I do all the time. I've always got a contingency plan for everything I do. I don't write them down. Most of them are up here in my head. So, let's go back to my trip. My good friend, who lives a couple of doors away, has agreed to take me to the station where I need to catch the train. Now, this man is a night worker. What happens if he's asked to stay on at night or can't pick me up? Now, I don't need to write this down, but I've got a contingency plan. Contingency plan is that I'll call a taxi Now, contingency planning is an important part of the planning process, but it doesn't have to be formalized. You just need to look at every part of the critical step and ask yourself, if this goes wrong, what do I do? And have that clear in your mind. So a little bit about planning there. The next step of the 4 steps or critical skills of a manager is control. Control. It's no good having a plan and not being able to control it. Control is often about getting feedback about how that plan is emerging. So in our organisation, Christian Warriors for God, when we say we're going to launch our new website, I plan it. I put in some control mechanisms to make sure that people who are going to deliver it are actually doing it. How do I do that? Well, it's simple. I just look at what I've asked them to do and see whether it's been done. But I have to schedule to do that. I have to recognise that you can't have good, effective management if you don't have control. Because control is about saying, if we go off track, what do we do then? A bit like contingency planning in that respect. So Christian Warriors for God have targets this year of what we aim to achieve, how many souls we aim to reach. It's no good me setting them at the beginning of the year in January and then checking them in December. It's too late then. And so we have controls. We audit every quarter. And we check how we're doing against our plan. I mean, common sense tells us if we check in 4 times a year, that by the end of the first quarter, we should have about 25% growth if we're going for 100% growth. And, auditing, checking, it's all about control. That's what managers are required to do. And, of course, to take actions if you're not on track. The third step, we looked at planning, we looked at control, is directing. Now, directing has a big overlap with leadership styles. If you remember from that first session, I think I discussed the continuum of leadership that says we can tell, we can sell, we can consult, or we can join. There are 4 basic styles of leadership, and directing is affected by those styles. Now, when we're actually planning, we don't have too much opportunity for consulting and joining because we've got a plan. We have the plan. We're not there to start changing it through discussions with people. So we're going to use the tell or the sell style primarily to influence people, to get them to actually deliver the plan. There is a place, of course, as I said in the first session, for consulting. But that's actually in the planning stage. If you're going to want to take people's advice and enrich your plan, then when you're in the planning stage, have your meetings, tell people what you're thinking, ask them for their inputs. I've had some really good examples where that has changed my thinking and ultimately has changed my plan. But when we get down to the direct stage, it's not up for negotiation at this point. That's what we're going to do. I'm the leader. I'm the manager. You must expect that I'm going to give you the plan and say, and this is what I need you to do. And it leads to the final point of the 4 steps of critical skills, which is organise. Organise is just about, we're back to the beginning. it's about the allocation of people and resources. The critical issue I struggle with is not to give people too much to do. You see, in Christian Warriors for God, we're not employees. People who work for us are not paid. They do it for the love of Christ. So organising is really about saying who does what by when, and breaking it down into manageable chunks that people can actually deliver. We'll be talking about smart targets more later in the program. But organisation is really about who does what by when. And I often say to people when I'm asking them to organise themselves, I want you to tell me who's going to do what and when are they going to do it by. This is all about getting people focused. This whole process: plan, control, direct, and organise. Now, this is what I'm going through with you, is pretty basic management skills that we need to have. This is, if you like, as the Americans would say, this is Management and Leadership 101 that I'm doing. It's not an MBA program where we take each of those steps and dissect them. But we don't need that. I mean, for most of us, we're ministers of God. We are men and women of God. But having good management skills, plan, control, direct, and organise, contingency plans, recognising a critical path, they're going to substantially enhance the effectiveness through which we do our work. Substantially. As I said, I want to move on to a very small subject, but very important subject, which is the subject of prioritising. You see, if you could see my desk, I have a pile of things I've got to do. A whole list on my pad of things I need to do. I actually use a to-do list on my calendar as well, and it's the first thing I look at every morning. But the question is, what do I do first? Well, there's a very simple model to help you determine what do you do first. And it's a model by which we compare the importance of something against the urgency of something. You see, some things are really important. I mean, really significantly important. They're probably strategic things. They've got to be done. However, some things are not necessarily that important, but they are urgent. You do need to do something about them quickly. Now, you could argue that everything is important and urgent, but it's not true. Let me talk about what I've got on my desk. You see, because I use different Facebook profiles, I use different profiles to promote different clusters of our work. I have to do that because Facebook wouldn't allow me to put it all on one profile. Now, I've got a task to do, to go through my profiles and make sure those groups are in those profiles, so that every day I can, or when I'm working in that profile that day, I can share those groups to the world. Now that's important, because that's going to make a big difference to our ability to save souls, to grow the kingdom. It's important. But is it urgent? Do I have to do it in the next 10 minutes? No, I don't. I can maybe do it later today. If I don't do it today, I can do it tomorrow. It's going to have to be done. You can't keep putting off the important, because sooner or later the important becomes urgent. It moves towards being urgent. So I tend to schedule important things because they often require time. You know, for me to add 50 countries to one of my profiles, that's a 2-hour job. And 2 hours out of my day is, I mean, work it out, about 15 to 20% of my time. So important, yes. Urgent, no. So what's urgent? I'll look at my list down here. Well, another job I've got to do today, or soon, is make some decisions about appointment of new leaders. Those people have got to be qualified. We've also got to make some decisions about appointing new churches, Christian Warriors for God churches in different countries. Now, those are important things. Are they urgent? Well, as I said, important increasingly becomes urgent. So by now, one of those has become pretty urgent. And I put a message out this morning to people about, let's get on and get this thing moving and done. We need to understand the difference between important and urgent. Urgent to me this morning is trying to respond to somebody who's dying of hunger. Urgent to me is dealing with somebody who is clearly giving false prophecy or false teaching. I take those things very seriously. Urgent to me is when somebody asks me to pray for them, because I do it there and then. You see, I can't say, oh yeah, well, it's important, but I don't need to do it now. No, I've got to do it. It's really as simple as that. Now, urgent things are often, in management, we talk about things being proactive, where you're kind of taking control of them, or reactive, where you're responding to things. Urgent things are often reactive, where you're responding to things that are happening, and you have to respond fast to them. One of the biggest weaknesses I see in management in our churches is their lack of decisiveness and speed to respond quickly to changing situations. They want to go away and think about it, and they want to talk to a few people, and they want to get into prayer. And well, these are all good things to do, but sometimes, you haven't got time for that. You need to be prepared to take action quickly. So, let's just recap. Today we've looked at the key skills of planning, controlling, directing, and organising. I talked particularly about contingency plans. I don't have contingency plans written down in my notes. I have them in my head at every stage of the process. I think if this goes wrong there, this is what I do. I'm one jump ahead, if you like, if there's a problem. We've talked about the difference between important and urgent. Important tend to be big stuff, often tend to be strategic stuff. Yesterday was the Sabbath. I don't normally work on the Sabbath. But it's been important for me to make sure we have an up-to-date list, because we're growing so fast, of all the groups in all our divisions, and our policies are up to date. Now, because I don't consider that work, because I'm sitting in my lounge as opposed to my office, I kind of fiddle around and got it done. It's been on my important list for some time, and now it's done. Urgent was me coming in here this morning and realizing that because I won't be available tomorrow to deliver my session on mental health, it becomes urgent. After I finish making this video, I make my mental health seminar video. It's urgent because I won't be available to do it tomorrow. So, understanding the difference between urgency and importance, two critical skills. Now, I'm actually going to finish there, which for me is early because it's only 26 minutes. Good time management, which, oddly enough, is what we're going to be talking about next week. You see, the most valuable resource in your ministry, in your organization, is you. You're the most valuable resource. And yet, all the evidence suggests that most of us are not that effective of asset utilization. There's a fancy word of saying we don't manage ourselves very well. So next week, we're going to be looking at that. How do we organize ourselves? Years ago, there was a big issue in business about time management. It's about personal management, really. So that's where we'll be next week. Wherever you are, or wherever you are, whatever your circumstances are, don't forget you can always come back to me and talk about anything I've said or ask me to clarify. I'll be very happy to do that. May the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you, now and forevermore. God bless you all. Bye-bye.